Imagine you are the commanding officer of a massive armada. You have millions of soldiers at your disposal, and your single objective is to successfully invade the United States mainland. Before you plan your attack, strip away the modern distractions. Pretend America's advanced stealth aircraft, its nuclear submarines, and its sprawling missile defense systems do not exist. Even without a single weapon fired in defense, your invasion is immediately blocked by a much older barrier. You have to conquer the physical map of North America. Long before the invention of radar or guided missiles, the physical location of the United States neutralized almost every conventional method of military invasion. A nation's terrain and its coordinates on a map can form an invisible shield. Often, dirt and water prove far more impenetrable than steel and firepower. The first concentric ring of defense is water. The United States is flanked by two oceans, creating thousands of miles of impassable moats. Moving an army across an ocean of that size is a severe logistical trap. You cannot simply drop soldiers on a beach and expect to win. A military requires a massive supply chain to survive. Every day, an invading force burns through millions of gallons of fuel, ammunition, and medical support. This graph illustrates the mathematical problem of moving an army, plotting distance against supply chain reliability. As ships move further, delivery ability drops. Entering this critical failure zone means your troops starve before securing a beachhead. Distance systematically destroys invasions. The oceans effectively turn a military assault into an unsolvable equation of fuel and cargo. If crossing the ocean guarantees logistical collapse, a smart commander will look for a land route. You need a friendly border to stage your troops and build up your supplies. Here, the map presents a rare geographic anomaly. America is bounded by only two nations, Canada and Mexico. Neither poses a conventional military threat. Look at historical empires in Europe or Asia. They regularly collapsed because they shared borders with multiple rival powers, forcing them to divide their armies and constantly defend against attacks from every point on the compass. The United States doesn't have that problem. With thousands of miles of harsh deserts or remote forests, an invading army cannot mass troops next door. You are funneled right back into the oceans. Let's assume the absolute worst-case scenario. Your supply chain holds together, you cross the ocean, and your troops successfully take an American beach. You immediately run into the final fatal hurdle. Capturing a coastline is meaningless when your target is one of the largest continuous landmasses on Earth. Your first problem is urban pacification. To hold territory, your forces must lock down megacities that stretch for miles, while controlling complex highway networks. Then, you push inland to secure critical infrastructure. That means capturing massive industrial manufacturing plants, energy grids, and resource centers scattered across different time zones. While holding those cities, your supply lines must cross expansive deserts, navigate towering mountains, and survive constant resistance from a heavily armed population. The internal scale of the United States guarantees that any landed invasion force will stretch its resources to the breaking point until it is eventually swallowed entirely by the continent. The oceans block the element of surprise, the secure borders eliminate a safe staging ground, and the massive interior prevents a long-term occupation. This natural fortress afforded the United States an incredibly rare luxury. It gave the country decades of time and safety to build a massive industrial economy free from constant warfare on its own soil. North America's geography is the physical foundation that allowed the nation to survive its early years and eventually rise to its current global position. Which leaves one final thought for our hypothetical commander. If the terrain alone makes an invasion nearly impossible, imagine what happens when you reinforce that natural wall with the most dominant naval and technological force in human history. America's defense relies on the perfect intersection of geography and military power, creating a geopolitical fortress. In Part 1, we explored how the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, combined with rugged coastlines, created a continent-sized moat. It is a massive, passive natural fortress. But standing behind a wall does not win a war. History is filled with empires who believed distance and deep water would protect them, only to watch their borders eventually get breached. Curious, so we have to ask, what actually happens to an advancing fleet the moment they manage to cross that geographic divide? They find out that the water was the easy part. Waiting on the other side is a military system built on technology, resources, and global reach. This system is designed with a very specific goal. It ensures that long before an enemy soldier ever sees an American beach, the sheer logistics of keeping an invasion force alive become unsustainable. The defense of the United States begins thousands of miles away. It is triggered by a network of international alliances built over decades. These international partnerships form a global tripwire. Shared intelligence and overseas bases ensure that any military mobilization against the North American continent is detected long before hostile ships leave port. Once a fleet does set sail, they face a harsh tactical reality. To successfully landing an army on another continent, you must establish absolute dominance over the water you cross. You need a constant chain of ships, carrying millions of tons of heavy vehicles, troops, daily food, and thousands of gallons of fuel. The United States Navy projects power outward to aggressively contest that crossing. Aircraft carriers and their accompanying strike groups turn the open ocean into a highly monitored and dangerous environment. Beneath the surface, fleets of attack submarines operate in total silence, waiting to sever those maritime supply lines from below. An advancing armada is forced into a war of attrition, losing ships and critical supplies while they are still weeks away from land. If an invading force survives the oceanic crossing, they immediately run into a second barrier: American air power. Modern aircraft provide overhead surveillance, the ability to respond to incoming threats in minutes, and precision strikes against slow-moving ships and landing craft. An invader would have to coordinate unloading thousands of soldiers and tanks onto a beach while simultaneously defending against continuous, overwhelming aerial bombardment. This chart maps the logistics required for modern warfare. Raw materials, parts, and fuel flow directly to the front line. Without this, weapons become useless. An invader's pipeline stretches across an ocean and breaks easily, while domestic defenders tap into a secure continental grid. The United States has the industrial foundation to produce and replace military assets on a massive scale. It is a system built to sustain a high-intensity conflict over a long period. An army's strength is ultimately measured by its stamina. A high troop count is irrelevant if the economy behind it cannot sustain the daily costs of an extended conflict. Successfully capturing a single coastal location is a tactical victory. Conquering an entire nation is a different reality. The moment boots hit the ground, a new challenge begins. An invader must defeat the remaining domestic military, push inland across thousands of miles of hostile terrain, and attempt to control a population that is actively resisting them. This diagram shows how these layers work together. Alliances, the Navy, the Air Force, and the domestic logistics base each multiply the difficulty of an invasion. Even if a hostile military establishes a foothold, they arrive exhausted, depleted, and cut off from home, and their hardest fight is just starting. But oceans, aircraft, and factories are only what can be measured on a map. There is a final layer to this defense that exists within the country itself. In Part 3, we will look at the internal resources, the geography of the interior, and the scale of the population that any occupying force would have to confront. Imagine an enemy force achieves the unthinkable. They cross the oceans, closing the distance to American shores. They somehow slip past the defensive perimeter of the United States Navy, evading the largest fleet on Earth. They survive the technological supremacy of the Air Force above them, and finally touch down on the mainland. Pop culture and history books often tell us that this is the decisive moment. We are taught that putting boots on the ground means the invasion is effectively won. In reality, capturing the border is exactly where the invader's nightmare begins. Securing a beachhead is a temporary military action. Holding that ground and attempting to govern a massive, deeply hostile society is a completely different equation. Taking control of the United States quickly stops being a standard military challenge. The logistics dictate that it becomes a mathematical impossibility. America's ultimate layer of defense relies on a compounding formula of scale, infrastructure, and societal resilience that makes the nation structurally impossible to hold. The first lethal variable in this equation is the geographic multiplier. The North American continent spans thousands of miles. An invading army pushing inland is immediately stretched across vast terrain. To move, they must capture the country's arteries, the massive, interconnected webs of highways and rail lines. The density of this infrastructure creates an immediate liability. Every single intersection, bridge, and rail yard requires 24-hour military guarding. Then come the urban centers. Trying to maintain order in these concrete canyons, packed with millions of people, swallows up entire divisions of soldiers. Every newly captured kilometer creates an exponential drain on resources. The territory itself turns into an active weapon against the occupier. Once an army is stretched to its limit, the endurance variable takes over. Wars of occupation are almost always decided by which side runs out of supplies first. An invader has to feed their troops, fuel their vehicles, and replace their losses through a fragile, easily disrupted pipeline that stretches thousands of miles across hostile oceans. Meanwhile, the United States operates on its own home turf, utilizing massive, deeply embedded manufacturing centers that are already fully operational. Because the country produces its own localized energy and extracts its own raw materials, it can recover from strikes and replace military hardware practically overnight. Driving all of this production are deep, systemic financial reserves that continuously fund an unending domestic counteroffensive. The math here is cold and brutal. An invading force cannot win a war of attrition against an adversary that builds weapons faster than the invader can ship them. An invader is fighting a highly dynamic, constantly reacting system rather than a static landscape. The country's capacity for rapid technological adaptation means the rules of engagement change daily. The defending forces constantly iterate on their communication networks and weaponry, forcing the enemy to keep adjusting to new threats. Then you factor in the most chaotic variable of all, attempting to subjugate a decentralized population of over 300 million heavily armed citizens. Widespread civilian resistance forces the invader to pull vast amounts of their own manpower away from the front lines simply to police the neighborhood streets. Because this population is tied directly into global markets, an invasion also triggers immediate diplomatic and economic blowback from strategic partners around the world. When you combine unpredictable technological shifts with an unconquerable civilian populace, the mathematics of a military occupation completely break down. History is filled with the ruins of once great empires that successfully marched their armies across borders, only to collapse because they could conquer but could not hold. We often define a superpower by its ability to build a defensive wall and prevent attacks, but true power is measured by what happens after that wall falls. A nation's absolute highest form of defense lies in the deep, unyielding foundations of its systems, the geographic, economic, and human structures that allow it to absorb a catastrophic blow and simply keep functioning. So, what do you think? Is the sheer physical scale of a country its ultimate shield, or does human strategy and resilience dictate survival? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments, and thanks for watching.